we have to do a lot of habitat management on the aquatic vegetation. The reason why is because if you block the sunlight from penetrating the surface of the water, what's going to happen? Have y'all gone through that?
No.
Okay. Well, we know we're probably most familiar with our food chain above the water, the surface, and on the land, but below the water, the surface is just as important a food chain. And the sun has to penetrate the surface of the water because there are microscopic organisms in there called phytoplankton.
Oh, biology's done that.
There we go.
Environmental though.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
They have.
So those phytoplanktons are very important. They maybe this will help. Phytoplanktons are like aquatic plants, and what is an aquatic plant going to do for your water?
Yep.
That's right. How's it going to help it? It's going to put oxygen in that water. Yeah, right. So you're going to put oxygen in that water, and that's important for water chemistry because everything else in the surface underneath that water has to have that oxygen. How does a fish breathe? And so does he come to the top of the water? Come to the top and get that air?
Yeah.
Depends on what kind of fish it is, but a regular fish that breathes through his gills, where is he getting that air?
In the water.
From the water. So he's got to have oxygen in the water to run across those gills and supply him with oxygen through his body. Now there are lungfishes like the grinnell and the gar, and they tend to gulp water or gulp air. But so when these plants cover the surface of the water, it breaks that chain, that pyramid down. We lose our phytoplankton. Well, because it's microscopic, there are microscopic animals that also eat that phytoplankton. They graze on the phytoplankton.
What about the zooplankton?
That's it. That's what it is, the zooplankton.
Okay.
The zooplankton eat the phytoplankton.
Okay.
Right. And what happens with the zooplankton, you think, oh, they're so tiny, what's going to eat a zooplankton? Well, baby fish eat zooplankton because baby fish are teensy tiny, and they have to eat teensy tiny things. So there's where your chain begins to start. And that phytoplankton breaks down, you lose your reproductive cycle of your fish, you lose your birds, you lose your reptiles, you lose everything else after that. So it's really important to have that tiny microscopic stuff there to keep everything else healthy. And before Lake of the Pines was built, this swamp and this lake was, for lack of a better word, would get flushed like a toilet, right? Because before that dam was there, in flood situations, you would get about 60,000, in some cases, up to 60,000 cubic feet per second. You know how much that is? Let me give you a comparison. Right now, that dam lets out 3,500 CFS. Have y'all ever been up to Lake of the Pines as they're letting the water out? It makes the dam shake because it comes out so fast. But 3,500 compared to 60,000 is a huge reduction. So we don't get flushed like we used to before that dam was there. That's why our vegetation gets bad. That's why we silt in so badly. And that's what we're trying to keep from progressing at a rate that we can't keep up with, because when it goes too fast, we can't keep a happy, healthy habitat. But those are some of the issues that we face with managing our aquatic species in this swamp, which is very important. Right now, these trees are not blooming right now, and one reason why they call them bald cypress is that they are some of the last trees that will put their leaves on. They're bald when everything else is putting their leaves on. So that's one reason, one way they got their name, a bald cypress. Another thing, they are like lightning rods. Have you ever seen that? They're kind of like a pine tree. They just suck in the lightning if there's a storm through. So if you were ever out here in a storm, you want to hiatus, you want to get the heck out, because everyone is like a lightning rod. And you never want to take shelter under a tree.
They suck up a lot of water, actually.
They do. They take a lot of water. They like water. The other thing you'll notice is a bald cypress. Sorry, I'm up and down. That's a duck blind, and we'll see lots of those, and I'll get back to that. But a bald cypress will not germinate in water. They have to have mud. So if you're looking around, you see these big trees, what you can tell, what can you tell? If I just told you a bald cypress will not germinate, its seed will not germinate when there's water, it has to have mud. What can you tell me about what this used to look like before you and I were here?
Real muddy?
It was muddy. There wasn't any water out here. That's right. So these trees would have to have had mud and a mud flat in order to germinate. And they also have to get tall enough before the water comes back over them, because you know, if they're inundated with water, it could kill them. So that's what, when you look around and you go through the lake and you see these real thickets, you can tell where the water once was and where it was not. And it gives you an indication about what it may have looked like at one time. The other reason that's important is because when we do water management practices, we need regeneration of these trees. Well, how are we going to do that?
Suck up the water?
The water has to be gone, right? So swamps, just a general part of swamp is water levels ebb and flow. They come and they go up and they go down. But when you start damming things, or you alter the water regime so much like that, you don't get a healthy regeneration, and sometimes not a healthy habitat, because the water has to come and go in order to get a nice healthy regeneration, and for those animals to really do their best as with how they evolved with what they evolved with. But you know, now it's less like a swamp and more like a lake. Even though it looks like a swamp, the water is kind of constant, and it's less like a swamp and more like a lake. Now, what's the difference between a swamp and a marsh?
Grass. A swamp and a marsh.
Sometimes they're used interchangeably, but there's actually a difference. Swamps will have trees, and a marsh has mostly grass. So if we were in a different location, like a lot of southern Louisiana is marshland, you know, they talk about losing the marshlands in southern Louisiana. Well, they're losing a lot of their grassy habitats, which are also just as important for wildlife. And